I lost my dad when I was 18. It was the year when I was sitting for my SPM exam. Everyone was in a state of shock because he used to be a very healthy person. The cancer came out of nowhere. The cancer took my dad's life. I was sad, angry, and confused. What I have experienced in those days is termed as normal grief. Grief is the experience of one who has lost a loved one to death. And this experience involves our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physiological changes. Everyone experiences it differently, be it the pattern or intensity over time. Here are some of the symptoms experienced by a person going through normal grief. While sadness may be the most common feeling we notice in the bereaved, other feelings such as anger, guilt, self-criticism often comes after the person went through the initial stage of sadness or shock. Next, physical sensations that include feeling emptiness in the stomach, discomfort around the chest and throat, oversensitivity to noise, a sense of depersonalization such as walking down the street feeling unreal of the surrounding. Some even report it as feeling like floating, and many other physical symptoms. This calls for greater physical care for the bereaved. It is never easy to be able to accept the reality of death, even if the death is expected. Therefore, it is common for the bereaved to be in a state of disbelief. And when it is hard to make sense of the situation, confusion sets in. The bereaved may also be preoccupied in trying to make sense of what had happened. Finally, in the area of behaviors, the bereaved often suffers from sleep and eating disturbance. They may also seem distracted or absent-minded. They participate less socially. Some may avoid remembering the deceased, while some trying their best to keep memories of the deceased alive. While we normalized these symptoms as part of grieving, we need to take note when the intensity or frequency gets out of hand. We need to be watchful when the person's anger begin to physically hurting others or themselves, or when they constantly in a state of shock to the point of unable to carry on with their daily chores or simple tasks. I often hear questions such as how to grieve well, or is there a proper way of grieving? Now, grieving is a very personal process, and each person goes through it differently. It is largely affected by who was the deceased, what was the relationship between the deceased and the one grieving, is there any unfinished business? Did the one grieving manage to say his or her goodbyes, etc.? There are many ways to heal well. One can write journals or talk to someone or even bring it to prayer. These are all good ways of for us to move towards healing. Now in this video, I would like to propose a more structured ways in how to grieve well. Professor William Worden from Harvard Medical School proposed 4 tasks one can do in order to heal better after a loss. Worden sees this task approach as something that the bereaved can do to adapt to the death of a loved one. There are 4 tasks in this model. First, to accept the reality of the loss. Second task, to work through the pain and grief. The third task, to adjust to a new environment. And finally, the task number 4, to find an enduring connection with the deceased while moving forward with life. First task, to accept the reality of the loss. It is easier said than done, even if the death is expected. It is very hard to accept that the person is gone and will not return. That is why some bereaved choose to temporarily deny that death actually happened. The bereaved may still call out for their loved one, even when he or she no longer around the house. Some may deny the meaning of loss by saying things like, "He wasn't a good father," "I don't miss him," or "His passing doesn't affect me much." Now, this is only a temporary measure to protect one from the full pain of death. To accept the reality takes time. That is why traditional rituals such as a funeral help the bereaved to move towards acceptance. The second task is to process the pain of grief. Again, it is not easy, but this time the issue is not on the person grieving, but often from people like family, friends, and so on. I'm sure you heard comments such as, "Don't cry, it's okay," or "Get a grip on yourself. You are young, you can still have a child." Or, "What are you crying for? He's old already." Or, "Don't cry, but have faith, okay?" These comments, though spoken out of good intention, it will only confuse us or put the grieving person in a difficult position. The body's natural reactions is to react to the loss: sad, shocked, overwhelmed, confused, absent-minded, low mood, etc. To stop a person from showing signs of grieving is like telling the person it is a wrong thing to do. The late British psychologist John Bowlby said, "Sooner or later, some of those who avoid all conscious grieving break down, usually with some form of depression." Again, I would like to emphasize the importance of grief counseling. It is to help people to go through this difficult task so that they don't carry this pain throughout their lives. And if this task is not adequately addressed, when a person seeks counseling later on in life, it will be even more difficult to handle. It will be very hard to work through the pain that he or she has been avoiding. Now, Colin Murray Parks, a British psychiatrist, said, "It is necessary for the bereaved person to go through the pain of grief in order to get the grief work done. Then, anything that continually allows the person to avoid or suppress this pain can be expected to prolong the course of mourning." In other words, the longer the person avoids pain, the longer the period of mourning. It is normal for the bereaved to cut off their feelings and deny the pain that is present, be it through distraction such as keeping him or herself busy, or not to talk about it in order to avoid painful thoughts. And this is where grief counseling will be helpful to explore the pain and to go through the pain together with the counselor. Task number 3. To adjust to a world without the deceased. In this task, there are 3 areas that need adjustments. The first would be external adjustments, next internal, and finally spiritual adjustments. External adjustment. After the death of a person, the bereaved adjust to a new environment. For example, death of a husband. The widow now have to adjust to a different life without her late husband. A loss of a husband means more than just a romantic partner, but also the many roles that he played. For example, handyman, exercise partner, a good listener, and many more. The person left behind, the one grieving, usually is not aware of all the roles played by the deceased until sometime after the loss occurs. It is not easy for the person to pick up the skills done by the deceased. First of all, already the one left behind carries a lot of responsibilities, and now to add on the roles of the deceased can really be overwhelming. Also, picking up all these skills played by the deceased only reminds him or her of the loss, and to pick it up is certainly not easy. However, when the person eventually embraces and masters skills that he or she never have taken before, it brings about new life to the person. And it also restores self-esteem, which we will look at in our next part of adjustments. For example, loss of a spouse. He or she will certainly felt that part of life is now gone and don't feel complete anymore. Or if the spouse has been very supportive, now no longer around, the person left behind will feel that he or she will never have such supportive environment anymore. And that will certainly shake the self-esteem or sense of confidence in this person. Spiritual adjustments is not so much on religion, but how the bereaved sees the world. That is why it is common to hear phrases such as, "My world ended with his death," or "I have lost the meaning of my life." And the spiritual adjustments become even more challenging when the death is associated with violence or untimely death, where one will often ask why such thing happen or why God allows such things to happen. Adjusting to a world without the deceased can be scary, can be a lonely journey if one do not have the support. That is why for us it is important to make ourselves available, to support them as they take up new roles, to affirm their sense of worth, to offer hope as they rebuild their shattered world. Task number 4. To find an enduring connection with the deceased while moving forward with life. I remember someone said to me, "Each time when I think of my father, it makes me feel sad. Therefore, I try not to think of him so that I can function as normal as I can. It is very difficult not to think of someone that we love or someone that is significant in our lives. Therefore, not to remember someone is almost an impossible task. That is why in the more recent grief and bereavement practice, we encourage the bereaved to continue remembering their loved ones who has passed on. There's a term for it. It is called continuing bonds. We find ways to remember the deceased and at the same time to move on with our lives. I came across this beautiful quote from a grief counseling book. It says, "A survivor's readiness to enter new relationships depends not on giving up the dead spouse, but on finding a suitable place for the spouse in the psychological life of the bereaved. A place that is important, but that leaves room for others." In other words, we don't have to forget the ones we once loved in order to continue with life. Instead, we keep those special memories, those intimate memories, a little corner in our hearts and in our minds. So how long will this grieving process last? Now there's really no easy or straightforward answer to that. For the four tasks that we spoke earlier, each person will have their own period or duration in attending to each task. Some may face longer time to accept the reality of loss, or some may even have issues or find it hard to adjust to new environment without the disease. And again, that requires time. And it is perfectly normal for a person to return to task number 1 or 2, even though he or she has already worked through the task, because maybe he or she suddenly realized maybe an aspect of that loss has not been dealt with earlier on. A simple guideline for a person who have dealt with their grief is that he or she will be able to think of the deceased with less pain, or that loss, that sadness is no longer paralyzing, and those energies of grieving is now used for life. No more inwards, but outwards towards enhancing lives of others and lives of his or her own.